whenever that happens. Yeah, and I love what I do. So I won't go too much into this slide because we have an awesome presenter coming up right after me. But I just want to do a kind of a quick PSA about mental health versus mental illness, and as coaches, what you are able to take on with your athletes. So what I do is I'm not a sports psychologist, which means I have a master's degree in sports psychology, but in order to be a sports psychologist, you need to have a doctorate in psychology. So I work with mental skills, life skills, mental health, but I don't really deal with any mental illness. Same thing as coaches, right? You are your athletes, like one of their best resources for so many things. You all have great relationships with your athletes. They look up to you so much. And I think as coaches, sometimes we ride this fine line between helping athletes and actually taking on too much. And so I just ask that moving forward, you recognize when you are outside of your scope of practice, and know when to refer and then how to refer an athlete. And so I know Krista is going to talk a lot more about this, but I just want you to kind of think about it as, say you have an athlete who has a mental illness. So say you have an athlete who has been diagnosed with depression, as an example. You are a really awesome support for them, but you are not their doctor. So you're not there to provide any sort of medical recommendations, etc. Just like if your athlete you had a diabetic athlete, you wouldn't be the one prescribing the doses of insulin. So just keeping that in mind. And again, I don't want to touch too much on this because Krista's going to talk a fair amount, but I always like to do this quick PSA when talking to coaches. All right. So most of us in this room, in this virtual room, we work with teenagers. Why this is important to recognize is because teenage brains are not fully developed. And so when we're working on mental skills, we are forming the skills that they're going to use for the rest of their lives. And so this is so important and really exciting because we can do a lot of good. And I think that sport is this really awesome vehicle to practice these skills in a fairly low consequence situation, that they can then take those skills into life. And so I am by no means a neuroscientist, but the two parts of the brain that I want to talk about that are really important in the teenage brain is something called your amygdala. So the center of your brain, your emotional center, what causes maybe what you've seen as like teenage outbursts, reacting really emotionally to something that you think maybe is a bit over the top. So that's your amygdala. And your prefrontal cortex is the front brain. This is like the filter, right? This part of the brain is kind of the logic and what says, okay, like maybe I need to kind of calm down and think about this a little bit more, use a bit more reason. This doesn't finish developing until we're 25 years old. And so I always like to kind of bring this up with coaches that work with youth because you need to kind of set your expectations realistically. And so if somebody's brain isn't fully developed in reasoning, then you have to keep that in mind that maybe some reactions might be more emotional. It might take a little bit longer to learn a skill, and that's totally fine. All right, so that's my little spiel on why teenagers are awesome. Okay, when we talk about mental skills, a lot of the time we talk about challenges. So I would like, if possible, you to write into the chat right now what you think some of the biggest mental challenges or mental barriers that you hear your athletes bring up. Do a little quick write in the chat about that. Be awesome. Awesome. Peer pressure. School is a big one, for sure. Balancing, that comes up a lot. Time challenges, for sure. That's a huge mental skill. And often why we find student athletes are really good students is because they actually learn those skills in sport. And as coaches, you can be really essential to help them balance that. There's also kind of the double take that perfectionistic tendencies that make great students make great athletes, but maybe don't make great mental health. But we'll touch on that. Yes, staying motivated, huge for both coaches and athletes, I'm sure. Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Emotional connection to support. Awesome. Yeah. So again, kind of tying into that like motivation piece, we'll definitely tackle a few of those. I like people to reflect on this because if we don't acknowledge what the challenges are and we go right into solutions, then we can't be specific enough to help those problems. I also love this picture. I think it's hilarious. Okay. So why? Obviously, I'm really passionate about mental skills. So I may be biased, but I also think I'm right. um, Mental skills, in my opinion, and mental training, it's just as important as physical training. It is so unrealistic to expect your athletes to have their like game brain, their game day focus ready, their race day focus ready if they have never practiced it, right? If you are telling an athlete, oh, like don't get distracted by somebody passing you, it's fine, and you're telling them this on the start line, when have they practiced that, right? You want to help build their confidence by practicing this at training, by practicing these various mental skills so that when those high stress situations occur, you're able to draw on that, those experiences with them to say like, actually, no, you do know how to do this. Just like technique, right? If they say like, oh, like that hill's just so steep in this race, I can't possibly one skate up it. Well, you can come back with them with actually like, you did it yesterday when you were skiing your course. There's no reason why you can't do it today. So yeah, just like anything else, you need to practice it to be good at it. Okay, this is a list of mental skills. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to show you that there's so many. And there's some maybe surprising ones on here. Something I'm going to talk about a fair bit is teamwork. That's a mental skill. It takes some skills to be a good teammate. It takes some skills as a coach to lead a successful team. Yeah, so I definitely don't have all of them in here, but there are quite a few. Okay, so if you haven't already, I'll ask that you grab a piece of paper and a pencil. And so I'm going to actually explain this, why we're doing this activity a bit more afterwards. But this is just an example of something you can use, maybe not like in like outside training. This is something, a little activity that you could use either before training or specifically if you're doing a practice set aside for goal setting. I like to use this activity because it helps explain the different types of goal setting to athletes. So what I'm going to have you do is, I'm getting up my timer here. I want you to write down the numbers 1 through 100, or try to get to 100 as fast as you can. Try to get as high as you can. You need to write them down in order. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do it. Okay? So are we ready to go here? Sweet. Okay. In 3, 2, 1, go. Stop. Awesome. Pencils down. Okay, real quick in the chat, let's see some numbers. What did we get up to? 41. Awesome. 40. 56. Dang. Awesome. Okay, that's great, everybody. Okay, we are going to do this one more time. And this time, I challenge you, you're going to get 2 numbers higher than what you just got. Okay? You can exact same instructions, but I need you to get 2 numbers higher. Okay? On your marks, get set, go. Stop. Sweet. Okay. Write in the chat, and maybe write like plus, like if you got more, how many more did you get? +4. Sick. Some gram -2. Okay, we'll exclude that one. Sweet. Okay. So if you haven't guessed it already, that is an awesome activity, super simple to do with your athletes to show them the importance of realistic goal setting. Okay. And so it shows you that for the second one, right, I said, I want you to get at least 2 more. That is totally within the realm of possibility for you to do. I didn't say, I need you to get all the way to 100. I didn't even say, I need you to get 20 more. I said 2 more. And so what that does is it shows your athletes that they need to set challenging goals, right? But achievable goals. And so you can kind of use that however you want to start a discussion with them heading into your goal setting. That's just one example. You can also kind of modify this activity and make it a distraction control activity. And so these activities are more suited towards like training camps, or if you're setting aside a specific session to work on mental skills with your athletes. So yeah, the distraction control activity, you print out a grid of numbers 1 to 100 that are all mixed up, and you put them in partners. And one partner has to circle in order the numbers 1 to 100, and the other partner gets to do anything to distract them. And so it's quite funny, it's entertaining, it's an awesome training camp activity to work on distraction control. So yeah, those are just super simple stuff that can introduce subjects to your athletes. Okay, next subject here. Yeah, side note as well, I'm going to be jumping around a fair bit and kind of just touching on various mental skills as we go through this to hopefully stimulate your brains in terms of creativity and how you want to work on these mental skills with your athletes, and then also giving you some of my ideas. So just as we talked about challenges earlier, I think it's super important with your athletes to talk about stress. Oftentimes it's this big elephant in the room. You can tell they're nervous. Their teammates can tell they're nervous. Everybody's nervous, but nobody really wants to talk about it. The best way to take the mystique out of stress, I have found, is to really explain it from almost like a scientific perspective. Stress is what happens when your body responds to a threat, right? Back in the day, it was a threat of survival, right? We get stressed out so that we can survive. And now a threat can be perceived as the start line of a race. And so get your athletes to list their physiological symptoms. They'll often say things like, my stomach gets upset, or I just don't feel well, I have to use the washroom, I feel like weak and shaky. These are all signs that they're stressed out. And I don't know how many times I've had athletes say like, oh, I don't know if I should race today, I think I'm sick. When in reality, it's just their body getting ready to go. And if you actually explain this to your athletes, it really takes the power out of that stressful feeling for them. Like, explain to them that the reason that their stomach is upset is because their body has kicked into action. Their body has decided that it is going to pump the blood to things that are going to make them be strong and go fast. Like, you're not making it up. This is what's happening. Their blood is now being diverted towards their lungs, towards their heart, towards their muscles, and getting them really ready to go. Stuff like digestive system, it's kind of secondary. It doesn't matter in that moment. And so that's why their stomach is upset. You'll see lineups at races for the washroom. The reason is literally like, people are like, well, okay, like, gotta empty my bladder, doesn't matter. Body doesn't have time to take care of that right now. And so again, taking the mystique out of it, I think, is super important. And then also learning to recognize the different signs of stress within your variety of athletes. The two extreme examples I like to use, you'll have one athlete who is really becomes very introverted, doesn't want to speak with anybody, maybe puts those headphones in and just like gets so tense and very not grumpy, but agitated. And then you'll have your other athlete that is stressed, but the way that they show it is that they show up to the start line and they don't have a glove and they've took someone else's race poles. Both are equally signs of stress, but it's just being able to recognize that within your athletes that I think is super important. And having them recognize it within themselves too, so that they know what's happening when it's happening. Yeah, so I spoke about this a little bit, but I can't emphasize this enough. Talk about it. Talk about what it feels like to be stressed. It normalizes the side effects. If they can recognize, like, okay, like I feel tense because my body is starting to get revved up, then they know that it's normal and it's fine. And then they can go about their warm up and know that their body is getting ready for something as opposed to freaking out about something. And so this is what we like to call positive stress or eustress. I know many of you, this is kind of a blurry picture here, but a lot of you have seen this graph before. And it just shows you, right? Like stress can be good to a point, right? We want our athletes to be at their optimal level of performance. And so, as I said before, getting their heart and lungs and muscles ready to go is a really good thing, but it can kind of go over a little bit too much and then actually result in a poor performance. So you need your athletes to be a little bit stressed to have a good performance, but then also finding strategies with them so that they don't go to the other side of the U and they're too stimulated. Okay, next mental skill, distractions. So let's go real quick right into the chat. What are some biggest distractions that your athletes face? It can be at training, it can be at races, really anything. And then I'll share what I think the most common ones are. Social distraction, cool. Oh, yeah. Significant others, absolutely. Other athletes. Yeah. Cell phone, absolutely. That's a big distractor in proper recovery, absolutely. What about, think about our sport. Like, what can be a big distraction that's specific to our sport? I think athletes might get hung up on it a little bit. Equipment, for sure. When I work with skiers as athletes, some of the biggest distractions that they face, I would say maybe the three most common ones. So number one, and this isn't just skiers, but I think it's pretty specific to skiing, is actually being distracted by pain. That is, I would say, of all the individual athletes I work with, almost all of them in endurance sports, pain is their number one distraction, being able to push through that pain. Number two is having people pass you in a race, so other people. And then number three is wax, and being distracted by things outside of their control, like conditions and being able to kick their ski as an example. Yeah, so just be aware of all the different categories that distractions can happen in. And then like anything else, be able to talk about them with your athletes. Okay, so we talk about distractions. Now let's talk about distraction control. Okay, this is the normal debrief I bring athletes through when we talk about distractions. And you can do this in a number of creative ways. But say we're just doing a one-on-one debrief with an athlete. So you ask them what their distraction is. Say, okay, I get really distracted when so-and-so passes me in a race. You say, okay, number one, how do you normally react when that situation happens? Athlete goes, well, I get really like discouraged and I stop pushing as hard. Okay, second question, how would you like to react when that happens? And so you'll generally get an answer of, well, I'd really like to kind of hold on to them as long as possible. And then number three, okay, let's work on some strategies so that we can get to how you want to react instead. And then this is something you can get creative with your athletes. So many fun ways to practice distraction control. This might be one of the funnest mental skills to work on in actual training. So many varieties, and you can get super creative with it, although there's a line between being a bit cruel and being creative. So I caution you on that. But great one is you say, okay, intervals are starting at 8:30. Be ready to start at that time. They all show up and you say, nope, intervals are starting at 9. And they have to deal with it, right? They have to go off. They have to restart their warm up. Doesn't matter. You can do things like, okay, distraction control, have them at the start line of a time trial or a race and say, okay, like give me one of your poles. And then guess what? They just broke a pole. You can do that for one interval. You can do it for all of them if you're feeling particularly like you want them to learn something. But yeah, encourage you to get creative with these. It's quite funny if we go back to this other slide. So this is a classic distraction control practice in a biathlon practice that I ran at one point. Lots of noise, pretty funny. All right, so the reason I have this picture here is because I'm going to tell a really quick story. This is Lois. She's awesome. She's totally given me permission to talk about her whenever I want. She is a whitewater canoer. And so her biggest distraction that we've worked on is that she drives her insane when she can hear the announcer announcing her race as she goes down the course, because oftentimes what they're saying isn't right and she just feels very judged. So we came up with this thing, this cue for her. She wanted something that she could do physically that would remind her to stay focused and to focus on her stroke. And so we came up with this idea that she would wiggle her toes in her boat. And that way nobody could see them, but she would know she was doing it. And it was a little cue to herself to say, okay, refocus, you got this, like, let's go, wiggle her toes. And so this came into play many times, but there was one time in particular that she used it really well. So she was at the start line in Australia at the Australian Open, and she felt something in her boat. And if you can see here, if you don't know the sport of canoe kayak, you wear something called a skirt. So it's like a cover of your cockpit so that you don't get water in the boat. So once you're strapped in there, like, you're not really gonna be opening it up. And she's like 15 seconds before her start. Start works really similar to a like individual ski start. You have the countdown clock, etc. Anyway, so she's 15 seconds before her start and she feels something in her boat. She's like, oh my God, you have to be kidding. Like, what the heck is this? And then it hops under her leg. She's like, oh my God, there's a frog in my boat. And this is Australia. Like, this is not a small frog. This is a big, big frog that's in her boat. I don't really know how she didn't see it before, but anyways. So she's at the start line. She's like, okay, holy crap, I gotta focus. Wiggles her toes, wiggles her toes. She goes down the course, has one of the best races of her life because she is so forced physically by this frog to refocus. She didn't hear the announcer once, paddled so fast across that finish line so that she could get the frog out of her boat, proceeds to have her freak out after her race is done. Frog hops out of the boat, lots of laughs. But now it's really cool because she has a little frog sticker on her boat, little sparkly frog, to just remind her that she is so in control of her own thoughts. So yeah, I'd like to share that story because I think it's a great one for distraction control. Okay, I know I'm bouncing around here, but next mental skill is identity. This is important. Identity is crucial, especially with teenagers. They will latch on to something, example, skiing, and they will make it their entire life. Why do we want to prevent this? Because, as I like to say, they are so much more interesting than just being a skier. I love that phrase because it gets smiles. But really emphasizing with them, and I'm sure this is something that you do often, just skiing is something that they do. It's not who they are. It is one small piece of what makes up who they are, but it is not everything. And so this picture was taken from a training camp, an example of how you can talk about identity with your athletes. You can get them to learn about values, right? Because values make up who we are. And then you can ask them the question, why do you ski? And you can see lots of cool answers on here. They ski because they like competition. They like to get better at things. They like to feel happy. All these awesome things about why they ski is, I think, an important reflection to do with them. Again, suitable to a training camp if you're interested in that. As a coach, at some point or other throughout your coach education, you will have to write a coaching philosophy. Trust me, I've had to do this many times, but that always starts at what your values are. And so if you haven't done so already, I challenge you throughout the next couple of weeks to really think about what your values are. Just pick 3 or 4. You don't need to pick all of them. But are your personal values, do they match up with your coaching values? I think this is a really interesting question you can ask yourself. Okay, big mental skill with athletes is confidence. Kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the start, which is you can't expect your athletes to fully believe in themselves if they have no proof that they've done it before. As a mental performance consultant, as a ski coach, you're not a fairy godmother or father. You can't just wave a magic wand and have your athletes be super confident for no reason at all. Confidence is based on facts. Right? It's based on things that they've done before they can do it. If you want them to feel confident and believe that they can get a top 10 at an Ontario Cup, they have to have some sort of proof that they can do that. Otherwise, that's not a realistic goal. I like to use the metaphor with athletes that you're building a confidence house, right? And you use the story of the 3 little pigs. You want to build your house out of brick, not straw. It can't be built off of kind of fake beliefs or things that have never happened yet. You want them to be built, you want your confidence house to be built out of each brick, right? Each brick is an experience, a success that you've had along the way, so that you can feel like you have a foundation to stand on. This also plays into goal setting, right? You can combine these two really nicely. Okay. This is a question that I base a lot of workshops off of because I think it's super important. It's also really cool to ask your athletes this when they are goal setting, whether it's for the season or when they're making their race plan the night before a race. I got this original idea actually from Jessie Diggins, one of her blogs she wrote before the Pyeongchang Olympics. And it was exactly asking herself this question: how am I going to know I'm successful at these Olympic Games? The reason I like this is because it gets athletes to reflect on something that's bigger than a podium moment. Like, especially at like your local race, I don't know, a medal costs what? Like each individual medal, it's like $10. Like, okay, and we've just arbitrarily decided to award the top 3. I won't get too philosophical into that, but you need to bring some perspective into it, because if you have all your athletes basing their success on, I need to win this race, I need to be on the podium of that race, otherwise I've had a crappy race, you're not going to have a lot of happy athletes. You can notice this especially in athletes. Say you're doing a debrief with them and you ask them like, oh, how did your race go? And they say, oh, it was super crappy, it sucked, I suck, all this stuff. And when they respond to you like that, if you have already gone over with them, okay, like, how do we know you are going to be successful in this race? And you reflect on those points with them. If they've actually met those points, then you can say, whoa, actually, remember what we decided before? And it brings them back to like, oh yeah, okay, I guess I can be proud of this. And then on the flip side, if they haven't met those objectives, if they had said that I want to one skate over the top of every single hill, and they didn't do that, then it can be a learning moment and say like, okay, like, let's make sure that happens for next time, or let's adjust this for next time. And it's okay that you didn't achieve that, but so it's okay to be a little bit disappointed. But yeah, it's setting a little bit realistic goals with them. Another metaphor, I like to talk a lot about metaphors, but this one I really like. Yeah, if you're just basing your success on being on that podium, it's like trying to cross a river, big gushing river, lots of rapids, and you have no stepping stones to get across, right? You need to be able to lay out those stepping stones to get to that end goal. An example here, this last point, the triple F, this is an answer that I worked on with another one of my paddling athletes. And so for him, his answer to how will I know I'm successful when I race blah, blah, blah race is, I know I am successful if during my race, I kept a flat boat, if I kept my stroke rate fast, and if I had fun. And so if he can put a check mark beside each one of these points, then he's like, yeah, okay, I had a successful race regardless of whether or not I achieved my result goal. All right, so in my opinion, one of the most important ways that coaches can incorporate mental skills with athletes is debriefing. I say debriefing a race experience here, but I would argue that we need to practice debriefing at practice as well. At practice, this might not look like every single athlete, every practice, okay, how did it go, blah, 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 but occasionally it will, so that they know what to expect. If all of a sudden at the end of a race, you go up to them and you start asking them all these questions, they're going to be like, oh my God, okay, like, what do you mean? Like, just let me do my thing. But if they're expecting it, then they'll be able to actually think through some of their answers before you talk to them. Important points when we're debriefing an experience is focusing on improvement and learning, right? So instead of saying when you meet an athlete right after their race, oh, that went super awesome, like, good job, it might not have. You don't want to put those words in their mouth, because then they feel like, were you actually watching my race? And so that relationship becomes not as strong. And so you want to ask kind of open-ended questions to them that they can tell you how the race went. And so questions that are great are, what went really well for you in that race? It's pretty rare that nothing goes well. They might try to tell you that nothing goes well, but I challenge you to push them on this. Great question is also, what do you want to work on for next time? This gives you something to work on with them at practice, between races, and then it also helps them reflect on their experience. Something I like to add in here, because it's kind of my coaching style, I guess, is I like to add a little piece of, no matter how their race went, whether it was super good or super bad, I always like to add the piece of, well, I am proud of you because, and then think of something specific to what they told you in their race plan, or something that you've been working on with them. I think just asking this question, or making this statement, sorry, is so important for forming that athlete-coach relationship and showing them that you're actually really invested in what they do. And it's going to make them want to work harder and do even better next time. The last piece here for debriefing a race experience is, oftentimes, as I said, athletes have perfectionistic tendencies. And even if you think, oh my gosh, this was like the best race they've ever had, if you're thinking that in your head, and they still might come up to you and be really upset because maybe somebody passed them that they weren't anticipating. That's okay. I think it's tricky because you don't want them to be unrealistically upset. So it's important to call that out. But if they didn't have the race that they were wanting to have, and they've worked really hard for this, it's okay for them to be upset. I like to tell them that you're upset because it's important to you. That's absolutely human, and that's totally fine. It would be weird if you weren't upset, but we do need to put a time limit on this. And so, especially when you're at away races, when somebody's kind of bad day can maybe affect an entire team, it's important to set a rule with your athletes. The one I like to use is, okay, like if you're allowed to be totally upset about this, as upset about this as you want, until you get out of the car to go back to the hotel, or until you've had a shower and you've changed your clothes, and then we're moving on to the next day. Set a timeline with them, making sure that they're being true to that timeline as well. Okay, another mental skill. I don't want to go too fast, but yeah. Challenging negative thoughts. I know earlier some of you coaches had said that this is a distraction or challenge that athletes have, is negative thinking patterns. Another thing I like to do with athletes is making sure you're explaining this to them. And again, the same way you would explain stress, going back to almost a scientific explanation of it. Thought patterns are made up of neurological pathways in your brain, and the ones that you practice are the ones that are going to be easier. Metaphor I like to use for this is, it's like the highway versus the dirt road. If you are constantly thinking negative thought patterns, like, man, I suck compared to these people, like, oh my gosh, I just moved up a category, they're all so big and strong, I'm just going to suck. If you're saying that on repeat in your head as an athlete, you're like paving a highway. And it's not just a metaphor, you actually are, because what you're doing is, in between neurons, you're actually building what's called a myelinated sheath, which is, anyways, fatty tissue that's helping the signal transmit faster and faster. So you literally are building a highway in your brain for these negative thought patterns. And so making sure that if you're going to build a highway, like, what are we actually working on here? And then challenge your athletes that, even though taking that dirt road, maybe thinking more positively and thinking like, wow, I could really learn from this experience, I'm so excited to get just as good and maybe even faster than my competitors. Thinking that instead, that dirt road, bit by bit, is going to become your highway. And so using that metaphor, I think, really helps with athletes to explain why you actually have to practice positive thinking. It's not just something that's going to come naturally to you. Okay, so a really cool thing you can use with athletes is naming their inner critics. Apologies to Rebecca's out there. This is a team I used to work with, and we did a training camp in Vermont, and basically these girls are all like first year U16, first year U16s. And so this roller ski, it was a huge challenge for them. It was a huge, huge uphill climb. super, super big thing for them to take on. So ahead of time, we talked about, okay, like it's going to get really hard. So what I want them to do is pick a name for that negative voice. Every time they want to stop, when their bodies and their brains are telling them, okay, no, we're done, we don't want to do this anymore, I want them to give that thought a personality. They chose Rebecca. We confirmed nobody knew any Rebeccas. We were good. So once we knew that Rebecca wasn't somebody that was going to be offended, we then encouraged them to, every time they wanted to stop, I wanted them to yell like, shut up, Rebecca, or just tell it to be quiet. And so sure enough, about halfway up this climb, I come across a group of these girls and they were stopped. And I was like, okay, like what's going on? Like, how loud is Rebecca right now? And they were able to tell me, because using the language that they were able to latch onto, they were like, she is so loud right now. I'm like, hey, well, what are you going to do about it? And so they just started yelling, shut up, Rebecca, shut up, Rebecca, and made their way up the hill. And it was awesome because it taught them that they had control over their thought patterns and that it wasn't them, but it was their inner critic telling them that they weren't good enough. So this is super fun strategy. Sometimes the athletes think you're a bit weird when you try to do it, but then they get really into it. Okay, team, super important mental skill to work on. I won't go too much into this, but I encourage you to talk to your athletes about what the type of team they want to be is. This came out of a team that I worked with that we did a lot of like brainstorming about stuff, and this was what they decided their team motto was going to be. And so this was said at every team meeting before races, and just as a reminder that not only were they the team that worked the hardest, but they were the most supportive and they had the most fun. If you're looking to learn more about team and the power of team, I highly recommend this book. World Class, it's all about the making of the US women's cross-country ski team. As we all know, they are a force to be reckoned with now, but they weren't always that way. And so this book really goes in depth into why building them up as a team was crucial in individual success. Team is so important, in my opinion. We're in an individual sport, but we only get better when we train together. And so reminding your athletes that positive competition means that we're striving together towards excellence. Remind them that how lucky they are that their teammates are so strong, because that's going to make them faster. Another thing with team is don't underestimate the power of a uniform. Man, getting kids to be proud to wear their team jacket is something that is super, super powerful. Brief little point on the power of team for girls versus boys. This is important when you're thinking about the type of demographic you have on your team. So for girls to be motivated to try hard, and this is coming out of a bunch of scientific studies, on average, for girls to be motivated to try hard, they need to feel like they belong on a team. For boys to feel like they belong on a team, they need to try hard first. So it's a bit opposite. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at what the demographic of your athletes is. All right, fun stuff. So regardless of the age of your athletes, a lot of you are already incorporating mental skills into practice. Examples are game of sharks and minnows. It's something I played in jackrabbits. It's something I've had jackrabbits play. What you're doing with them is you're practicing internal versus external focus, right? You're practicing, okay, I'm going to be the hunter versus, oh, I'm being hunted. And so explain this to them in whatever level that they're at. But don't be afraid to say, hey, this is actually what we're working on when we're playing this game. Another exercise, skiing with different emotions. Get your athletes to do an interval when they're smiling. They're only allowed to smile the entire way, even if they feel silly about it. And then get them to do another one when they get to think about something that really pisses them off. And then reflect with them which one worked for you, like which emotion gives you more power. This works on self-awareness. Yeah, as I talked about before, change in the environment is distraction control. Lots of something a lot of us work on, agility courses and jumps. Whether it's roller skiing or on skis, this can be a great confidence builder. So that when you're getting to a course, for example, at Nackertalk and you have Dirk's dive, you can remember that time that you did that crazy obstacle course on roller skis and you really succeeded at that. Well, your balance is great. You've proven to both you and I that your balance is great. You can do this. specific partner strength, relay, scavenger hunt, you're working on teamwork. And yeah, feedback. Anytime you give feedback to an athlete, that helps work on their motivation. Okay, so I'm 1 minute over here, but I will wrap up real quickly. The take-home messages that I want you to remember is taking the mystery out of sports psychology. It's not this mystical thing that people are either good at or not. It's something that takes a lot of work. Remember that when you're teaching athletes, in particular when you're teaching teenagers or even younger than that, the things that they're learning in sport are things that are going to last them for a lifetime. You're working on life skills. Like, let's be realistic. You are working on things that they're going to transfer to the stress of taking a test at school, and to other life stresses, and being able to manage their lives as well. I encourage you to incorporate mental training into practice, just as you would physical training. And kind of, it's not written here, but I would add to that, tell athletes when you're doing something. Make sure you say, this practice we're working on distraction control, and then debrief it with them at the end of practice so that they understand, okay, this is what happens. This is what I need to work on. And yeah, have fun with it. Be creative. I think cross-country ski coaches are some of the most creative coaches out there. And so working on mental skills should be no exception. Okay, I think I got it all in. Cool. Yeah, and if as always, like my door is always open. Please feel free to send an email ever if you have any questions or want to brainstorm with me on different activities you can do with your athletes. I would love to help you out.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you so much. Great. We're going to move on to our second presentation, and I just briefly want to tell you how that all came about. I was, as most of you know, working on the safe sport side of guidelines and policies for the last little while, and hopefully you all know that there is a Canadian sport helpline. We have that number on our website in the safe sport section, and I just thought, well, I have a few questions from some of the club contacts, and I'm just going to phone the helpline and see what happens. So a couple of times I phoned them and had some really interesting discussions with the person who was answering the helpline. And we ended up they actually told me about the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, which I have to admit I wasn't completely aware at that time. So I thought that sounds really interesting, and I did some research on it and really got my brain going on what sort of cooperation we might be able to do. So I phoned up Krista Van Slingerland, and she is the executive director for the center, and so we had an interesting conversation, and then we ended up having a staff meeting with her, and here she is doing a presentation on. I have to leave it up to her. It's I think it's a little bit broad on mental illness versus mental health, and I'll just let her take over from here and share with us what she is going to present. Thank you, Krista, for being here.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Since you just listened for a while, if you want to get up and grab water, food, bathroom break, go ahead. I won't be offended. Yes, Peter's like, okay, I'm gone. Bye-bye. Love it. I don't want anybody sitting there thinking, man, I wish I had gone to the bathroom an hour ago. What I'm going to take you through today, hopefully in an hour, is basically our foundational mental health literacy curriculum at the center. And it's going to help you better understand what mental health and illness are, how they're connected but different, how sport interacts with those concepts, how to recognize distress and address that with an athlete, and then how you can promote mental health through your coaching practice. And I'm going to touch sort of at a broad level on all of these concepts. And it's our hope, the center's only 2 years old, so it's our hope that in the future we'll offer education sessions that are deeper dives into each of these. But I hope this gives you a really good overview, and I'll leave you with my contact information if you have any questions. I'm happy to chat with anybody. So I've never, okay, hold on, I'm gonna get this. I've never presented on Google Meet before. A window. Yeah. Okay. Are you guys just seeing the whole slide?
We're seeing mental health in sport. What is the coach's role? Question mark.
Sweet. Okay, great. That's what I'm hoping for. Awesome. Yes. So what I want to help you clarify today is what your role is when it comes to athletes who are experiencing mental health challenges or who you encounter who are in distress. So we'll start off with some food for thought. Just take a moment to reflect on these questions, and I'll happily send you the slide deck after. So if you want to take some more time to deeper reflect on these. But have you considered mental health as a key input of athletic performance before? Do you believe that coaches owe a duty of care to athletes to help them maintain their positive mental health? Do you consider mental health when you're creating training and competitive plans for your season in the same way you might consider mental skills and the tools that Katie gives you, or strength and conditioning or what have you? And do you have a plan and resources to support athletes in crisis? It's okay if you've never thought about these questions before, or if the answer is no to a lot of them. Hopefully it can give you some foundational knowledge and skills tonight that can help you do this in the future. So I'm going to start off with a little activity. You can feel free to speak up. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see the chat, so maybe someone could read it out. If people feel more comfortable just typing in the chat, go ahead.
Monitor that, Krista.
Okay, thank you. So consider and just shout out what a mentally healthy athlete looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And if it helps you, you can think about what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when somebody is struggling instead. So I'll take answers for any of those three. What does it look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like? Shout it out, guys. Oops.
Okay, we have smiling, laughing, working hard.
Good. Anything else? What does it sound like? And that could even be, what are they saying verbally to you, or what is their inner dialogue saying, do you think?
We have another feels tired after school, quiet, happy. Or focused, engaged, excitement.
Thanks.
Socializing freely, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Feels connected to the team.
Yeah, these are great answers. Excellent. Okay, so you guys have touched on a lot of important points. Unfortunately, mental health looks different for everyone. It's a very individualized thing, and I think we know that people who are struggling start to get really good at hiding their distress. So the long and short of it is, it can be difficult to tell if somebody's struggling, and that's why it's really important for you as a coach to start to get to know your athletes on an individual basis so that you know what their baseline normal is. Because somebody could be mentally healthy and be crying, and that could be normal for them after a competition or after a practice. Sorry, I live in a very small apartment and my partner is just making dinner. So I apologize for the noise. So basically, yes, mental health and distress, they can look different for everyone. So it's important to know the baseline, and coaches are in a really great position to know the baseline normal because you do interact with athletes on a fairly regular basis. So what is mental health in an academic sense? It's the sum of somebody's psychological, social, and emotional well-being. And we think of it, or we explain it like a syndrome of symptoms. In the same way you think about like the symptoms of a cold, so coughing, sneezing, fever. You can think about the symptoms of positive functioning as well. So it's feeling positive feelings more often than negative, feeling satisfied with life, feeling like you accept yourself, feeling that you have autonomy to make decisions for yourself, experiencing mastery in your environment, having positive relationships with peers, with teammates, with coaches, with parents, feeling purposeful in life, feeling like you're growing, and feeling like you're integrated or you belong into your community. These are some of the symptoms of mental health. So a lot of the things that you guys talked about touched on these 3 domains of well-being, which is great. How about mental illness? So mental illness is about persistent and substantial deviations from that baseline normal that I talked about. Persistent meaning usually I'll tell people 2 weeks or more. So if you're seeing changes in somebody's thoughts, behaviors, or feelings, and they last for 2 weeks or more, that's a time where you can kind of like, it's a red flag and maybe I should intervene or maybe I should have a discussion with this person. And when we're talking about significant deviation from normal, we're talking about experiencing symptoms that impair that athlete's ability to have positive feelings more often than negative, to execute their roles and responsibilities, to maintain healthy relationships with others, and contribute meaningfully to their community. So in practice, it might look like an athlete stops showing up for practices, they stop working as hard as they normally do, maybe they're fighting or having more conflict with teammates or with you. Maybe they're not looking at you and when you're huddling to have a team conversation. Maybe it doesn't seem like they feel like they're performing very well. All of these things in isolation don't necessarily point to a mental health challenge, but if they are persistent and it's significantly different than that athlete's baseline normal, it definitely won't hurt to have a conversation. So you're looking for changes that are prolonged in their thoughts, their feelings, and the way that they behave. So what is the relationship, though, between mental health and illness? And this is important, and I'll explain why in a moment. But for a long time, we thought that mental health and illness were at opposite ends of a spectrum, so that mental health was essentially just the absence of mental illness. But through research, we've come to understand that they're related but distinct concepts. So in practice, what that means is you can have a mental illness. So myself, I will probably always, from the rest of my life, struggle with depression. I take medication for it, so I'm probably always going to be on the left side of this continuum. So in that top left or bottom left quadrant. But I can also do things to maintain optimal mental health, meaning that I have mental illness, but I can still thrive because I practice self-care, I have supports around me, and so I can still have optimal mental health. That's really important for athletes to understand that you can still be a high performer with a mental illness. And there are lots of awesome examples. Michael Phelps, Clara Hughes, Kevin Love, with all these athletes coming out and telling their stories of struggle, people can start to believe and understand that you can thrive and perform well with a mental illness. But it's also important because you can have no diagnosed mental illness and still experience poor mental health. So you're on that bottom right quadrant. And that's why mental health is applicable to and important for everyone. We all need to be trying to maintain high levels of mental health so that we can optimally function in our life, enjoy our lives, show up for the people that we care about, and when it comes to coaching, actually create more positive environments for our athletes. And I'll talk about that later on. So mental health in the context of sport is a little bit special and different than in other contexts. So the things that contribute to our levels of mental health, to everyone's levels, are in white here. So experience of symptoms of mental illness, and that's based on biological, social, and psychological factors. So things like your genetic makeup, where you grew up, like the circumstances that you grew up in, socioeconomic factors, those kinds of things. They also your mental health also depends on what mental health assets you have. Luckily, these are things that you can gain. So internal mental health assets are things like mental skills, like Katie talks about. And interestingly, a lot of the mental skills that we use as athletes to perform better can also be applied to our mental health. Things like self-talk, ways to self-regulate, strategies to be more resilient. You can learn these in sport and apply them to your mental well-being. So that's really interesting. And MPCs have a really great role to play when it comes to helping athletes maintain positive mental health. You could also have external mental health assets, and those are things, basically think of it like your support network. So your MPC and Katie, or for an athlete, you as a coach could be a mental health asset, parents, psychologists. So all these people, this network of support that you can create around yourself. There are other domains of well-being as well that impact your mental health. So we know our mental health is emotional, social, and psychological well-being. There are other domains as well, your physical, spiritual, financial well-being, and all the domains are tied together. So when you are dysregulated in one of those well-being domains, it's going to impact the other ones, whether you like it or not. Like if you have an injury, if you're experiencing financial hardship, if you're grappling with, I don't know, existential questions, those stressors are going to come into the other areas of your well-being, of your domains of well-being. We only have one tank to deal with stress. So this notion of, leave your stresses at the door when you come to practice, in reality, it's really difficult to do because there's only one tank. So those are the factors in white that affects everybody's mental health. But there are also sport-specific factors, and this becomes important in a competitive and high-performance context because these factors can trigger the development of a new psychological concern, exacerbate some existing mental health challenges, and it's things like sport culture, the pressure to perform at a high level, just sheer training load that can cause athletes to burn out, how much recovery you take, the style of coaching that we use, our relationships with teammates, so our teammates bullying us, our eating habits, are we trying to make a weight class and that's leading us to disordered eating. So there are lots of sports-specific factors that you don't encounter in other contexts that make mental health, in the case of athletes and coaches, really unique. So where does mental performance fit in here? I see you guys have a great resource in Katie. So you know that mental health or mental performance is about the cognitive processes that help us perform tasks continuously and often without us knowing. So those automatic processes, things like decision-making, attention, the way we perceive the world, our coordination, and our memory, which are obviously key inputs to athletic performance, right? And mental health is foundational to all of those. Interestingly, mental illness actually alters the brain's structures. So it changes the way that your neurons fire and communicate with each other and can impair your attention, your coordination, your decision-making. So another reason that you want to maintain high levels of mental health as an athlete is so that you can perform optimally and there aren't cognitive barriers. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have questions about what I have said so far? It's a lot of info to digest. Okay, cool. So I'll move on. Something important to note is what the coach's role is. And it's probably one of the most frequent questions I get asked, like, what is my duty of care to an athlete? And the duty of care is like the minimum standard of care that you owe to another person. So duty of care of employers to employees is written into Canadian labor law, for example. But it gets murky with athletes because they're not, for the most part, they're not formally like an employee of an organization or of a coach. So there's no legal precedent or structure or framework per se that can help guide us in this circumstance. But there are the NCCP Code of Ethics and Standards of Behavior, and that can form the basis of your duty of care. The very minimum that you owe to an athlete is to help preserve present and future health and well-being, and to demonstrate respect to individuals regardless of disability. And mental illness is a recognized disability under provincial human rights legislation. So you're looking to not discriminate, and you're looking to help preserve mental health, essentially. And I'll talk about how you can do that later through coaching practice. So that is the bare minimum. You as a coach, that's the duty that you've got based on the standards and principles that we have to guide our coaching practice. But you can also build upon that based on your individual characteristics. Things like what you believe your role should be. So let your values, your ethics, and your experiences guide you in this. How comfortable you are in various situations. And that might fluctuate based on some training or past experiences you've had, maybe somebody in your family with a mental health challenge or mental illness. So you're kind of used to dealing with these things. Your competency in various situations. So, I'm not asking you as coaches to be mental health professionals. You already wear so many hats as coaches, and I know that, especially at the community and grassroots level. I'm not adding mental health practitioner to the hats that you need to wear. But if you've taken extra training like we're doing now, or mental health first aid, then you might have some additional competencies that you can use in situations where you're encountering an athlete in distress. Your role also could have to do with the support and resources you have around you. So this is a great example. Maybe, Katie is a great touch point for you guys. If you have an athlete that you think is struggling, she, like I said, mental skills can help contribute to our mental health, and she is trained to know where the scope of her practice ends and she needs to refer elsewhere. So she can be a great resource for you to help you have these conversations. And sorry, Katie, I'm putting you on the spot. But I know she's well trained, so she can help you if you're feeling like, okay, I don't know what to do. This is beyond my competency level as a coach. When it comes to mental illness, this is the bare minimum that I, ask coaches to aspire to be able to do. That is recognize distress and refer appropriately. So we talked about already, you're looking for changes in athletes' thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, and that's changes in their baseline behavior. And when you're noticing those they're persistent, so 2 weeks or more, then it's time to have a conversation and potentially refer to appropriate resources. Having that conversation can be really tricky, especially if it's something you've never done before or don't do often. It's uncomfortable, it's stigmatized. So I want to give you some sort of skills or tips to have these conversations. The first is to choose a private space. Now I know that safe sport and the rule of two makes this difficult. So what I would suggest is if you're on a course or in a gym, if you can take that athlete that you want to have this conversation with and turn their back to their teammates, that gives them a tiny bit of privacy so their teammates aren't watching the emotions on their face unfold as you have this conversation. You could also have it in an office and invite a third party to come. So if Katie is a trusted person for this athlete, you could ask the athlete if it's okay if Katie joins you and have that conversation all together. So that's the choose a private space piece. It is a difficult conversation. It's not one you want to have publicly in front of a teammate or many teammates. The second is to start your discussion as a concern for their well-being, and you can use I statements to do that. So you've recognized some changes. So it could be, hey, Sally. Nobody's named Sally anymore. Hey, Sally, I've noticed in the last month you have lost a lot of weight and I'm concerned for your well-being. Can we chat? So you're just stating facts of things that you have noticed, and it's coming from you. It's your perception. So it's not accusatory. It's just an observation, and it's a concern for their well-being. So you want to have a chat. Do more listening than talking if you can. Usually if somebody's struggling, once you give them that open door, it may take a few questions to get them speaking, but generally we want help when we're struggling. And so you're going to have a great chance to do more listening than talking. Give your athletes the benefit of the doubt, especially when the things that you're noticing are negative behaviors, like missing practice or interpersonal challenges within the training and competition environment. Start by stating that those are the things you're seeing rather than accusing them. So, like, you're not showing up for practice anymore. I assume that you're not committed to this team, and I'm considering whether or not you should even still be here. We have an athlete at the University of Ottawa. She stopped showing up to weights. She stopped being on time to practices, and that was the assumption that we made. Oh, she doesn't care anymore. She was struggling with depression. It's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to eat. Of course you're not coming to practice. Of course you're not, lifting weights. So start with the benefit of the doubt. And don't worry about intruding or offending the athlete. That's like the best case scenario. Or you could say nothing, and the athlete could hurt themselves or somebody else, and you'll wish you have said something and just dealt with that awkwardness. So embrace the uncomfortableness that is, embrace the discomfort that is having these conversations, and don't worry about offending somebody. I think, when these questions are coming from a place of caring, it's going to be tough to offend an athlete. Oh, where to refer? That's important. So if your athlete's in crisis, meaning they are feeling suicidal, they confirm that they have a plan and intend to act on it. So those are your sort of 3 questions. And when you're concerned about suicide, it's an uncomfortable conversation, and you have to be direct about it. Because as the person who is suicidal, it's really uncomfortable to disclose that to somebody else. You don't just walk down the street and say, hey, coach, I'm feeling like killing myself today. It's not socially acceptable. It's not something we do. So you are going to have to kind of probably pull that out of the athlete unless you have a very special, trusting relationship with them. So it's, are you feeling like you want to hurt yourself? Yes or no? Say it's yes. Have you thought about how you're going to do that? Essentially, do you have a plan? If they can describe their plan, okay, do you have any intention of acting on that plan? If that's a yes, that is absolutely a call to 911, or you're bringing that athlete to an emergency room. So are you feeling suicidal? Do you have a plan? Are you intending on acting on that plan? Those are your 3 sort of questions. And if they are all yes, that's your cue to bring them to some crisis support. Maybe they have a plan and they're not intending to act on it. You can still access crisis helplines. There are a national helpline that would then direct you to your provincial, local resources. There are online resources. I don't think I included it. No, I didn't include it in this presentation, but I can send it to you guys later. There are some great online resources for youth, like the Youth Distress Line. You can now text 24/7, so that's pretty cool. You can access private or public resources. Private meaning psychologists, counselors, psychotherapists. Public resources being a psychiatrist that you'd have to go through your doctor for, or public clinics. Your MPC is a really great place to start. Like I said, Katie will know where to refer and can help you make that referral. And then there are sport-informed resources like us at the center. I'll tell you quickly about us. We offer sport-informed mental health care. So we have a team of 18 practitioners from coast to coast. They work virtually and in person, and they all have a background in sport in addition to their training in psychology, counseling, psychotherapy, or mental performance. So it's a very unique resource, unique in the world, actually. They will use a collaborative model, and we have a care coordinator that is the central touch point and neutral touch point, and helps athletes, coaches, or support staff navigate the care process. So if you want to learn more about us, we can have a side conversation later, or you can visit our website down there at the bottom of the slide. Unfortunately, we service athletes, coaches, and support staff who are 16 years of age or older, and that has to do with the competencies of our practitioner team. When you start to get younger, you need training in child psychology, and we just don't have enough team members with that training to offer that resource across the country, so 16 is our cutoff point. We will always, though, refer out if we cannot be the resource to help that person. Athletes, coaches, support staff, they can refer themselves, or you can refer on somebody else's behalf with their permission. So in this case, the athlete's permission for you to fill out the form online. It's super simple and quick, available right on our landing page. And you would just fill it out on their behalf, probably with them there because it asks for a bit of their info. And then our care coordinator will get in touch after that. Okay, that's my tiny elevator spiel for the center. But like I said, happy to talk about it more in depth if you want. Okay. So that's sort of the basis. Knowing, recognizing distress and referring is like the basic that I would ask you to have as a coach. If you want to do more, and this is about, you know, your role of preserving well-being, you can actually contribute to distress prevention through your coaching practice. So the first way is to know and avoid using psychologically abusive behaviors. So if you've taken that safe sport module, you'll know these 4 behaviors: an attempt to control, verbal hostility, so name calling, belittling, humiliation, physical aggression, and that's not just, you know, physically grabbing an athlete. It could be throwing a clipboard, throwing a chair, which are all very common practice in sport. Those are considered physical aggressions. And then denial or attention support is another great coaching tactic that we see often. I remember my coach always said, if I'm not yelling at you, it's because I don't care anymore. So being ignored was sort of the punishment. I think it's just a very old school, very controlling coaching style. Controlling coaching being the opposite of autonomy, supportive coaching styles. And a lot of us coach the way we were coached. So hopefully on some of the next slides, I'll give you some different ways to approach coaching that still produces competitive results, but doesn't harm athletes' mental health. So know and avoid being psychologically abusive, and avoid autonomy depleting coaching style. The two are very closely linked. There's a lot of overlap between a controlling coaching style or an autonomy depleting coaching style and psychological abuse. So don't pressure athletes to feel, think, and behave in specific ways. That often comes from culture setting, and sometimes there are like unspoken rules that veteran athletes pass down to younger athletes, you know, particularly in like university sport, national team sport environments where you have athletes coming through in successive years. Autonomy depleting or controlling coaching style, it promotes extrinsic motivation. So motivation is not coming from inside the athlete. It's out of fear, or it's out of not wanting to be ignored. And that kind of motivation, it's not sustainable. It's not a high quality motivation. So you're not going to get results over time, and you're not supporting psychological well-being. There are actually studies that link extrinsic motivation they link controlling coaching styles with negative psychological well-being. Okay. So this is about preventing mental health challenges. This is about promoting mental health. So you're actually taking an active role in preserving and promoting athletes' mental health. The first way you can do that is by presenting mental health as a difference maker. So in the same way that we would say, like, we're a defense first team, you can be a mental health first team. Or Katie talked about, the team wanting to be the hardest working team. You're the team that takes mental health into account. Establish it at the beginning of the year. It's a core team value and central to your team philosophy. That just sets a tone and sets a culture. And also it encourages that open door policy. You can also establish a common language around well-being. So that looks like, sounds like, feels like activity that we did at the beginning. That was a little bit to help you guys develop the language to talk about mental health, because it's not something we learn in school. It's not something that is natural for us as humans. So if you can establish a common language with your team, it will make those conversations so much easier. Athletes disproportionately suffer from something called alexithymia. It's a subclinical disorder, and basically it's an inability to recognize and articulate your emotions. And I think that that's because sport promotes stoicism. We're taught to ignore what we're feeling on the inside in pursuit of performance. So we don't have the language to describe our emotions. We don't have the language to talk about when we're not feeling well. So you can help establish the common language that you guys are going to use to talk about when you're feeling good and when you're not. An even easier way is establishing code words. Things like a traffic light analogy is like a super simple way to do. You can ask, okay, what zone are you in today? Green means smooth sailing. I'm good to go. I feel good. Yellow means, I'm experiencing some stressors, but I'm still under control. Just use caution. And then red is, I've reached my limits. I need different approach today. Just beware, sort of thing. So red, yellow, green. That's an easy way to talk about how we're feeling without actually saying, I feel depressed today, or I'm experiencing a lack of motivation, or whatever it is. You can also normalize checking in. So when I do this seminar on a larger scale and it's a 3-hour workshop, we start by checking in. And I ask coaches how they are, but they're not allowed to say they're fine, they're good, or they're okay. When you consider how often you ask people how they are, but you're not really expecting a real answer, you can start to change that with your teammates, with your athletes. But you have to be prepared for honest answers. So if you establish that they're not allowed to say fine, good, or okay, you're going to probably get some realness and be prepared to deal with that. And really, it's just about normalizing distress. We all experience stressors and we all experience negative moods, and that's okay. And you can still thrive and have a good practice. And we're here to support you, So it's just normalizing, having those conversations, checking in, and continuing to get it done on the field, in the gym, on the track, whatever it may be. You can also promote positive mental health by having a plan. So in the same way you would create a seasonal plan for your practices, you can create a seasonal mental health plan that takes into account the times during your season that are sort of high stress times. So if you have kids in school, think about exam times. Think about, runs up to championships. Consider when there are huge stressors in your season and balance training with some mental health maintenance activities, whether that's like a fun team building session, yoga, something to help athletes recover, focusing on nutrition. So plan for those difficult times ahead. The second is to schedule periodic mental health check-ins. So if you already meet regularly with your athletes to talk about their performance, you could set aside dedicated time to talk to them about their mental health. And that's the only purpose of the meeting, is just to check in. And it starts to become normal. And again, athletes will develop the language to talk to you about their mental health, and start to feel comfortable doing it because it's part of the routine and structure that you've created around the training environment. Third thing is to develop a plan that you will follow when you notice that your athletes aren't well. So I call this a mental health action plan. I will send you guys, I've got a lot of things to send you. I'll send you guys a template that you can work on with your athletes. And basically it asks the athlete to reflect on what it looks like when they're not doing well. So what are the symptoms when I personally am feeling stressed, overwhelmed, depressed, whatever it may be. The second thing is, how do I want my coaches and teammates to approach me? And this is really important, especially in team contexts. So I was fortunate to do this mental health action planning with my coach at the start of my 4th year at the University of Ottawa. I had come from another school. He was aware of the mental health challenges I had experienced, and we started by making a plan. And that plan was super important, not only for him to know what the signs were that I wasn't doing well, but also so that we could set a precedent and an understanding with my teammates at the outset of the season. So we talked about, you know, what actions are we going to take if Krista's not well? How are we going to tell teammates? What will we say? And what are the expected actions and behaviors in return from them? So there was 1 week in those 2 years that I was not well and couldn't come to practice. And when I returned and started practicing again, for example, I didn't lose my starting spot. And there was no animosity, and there was no, there was no animosity because we had already established what would happen when I was not well. And it just made it easier for my teammates to accept, to ask me when I didn't think I was doing okay. And I think it gave my coach some peace of mind because he had a plan. So the last piece of the mental health action plan is a crisis plan. So I wrote down with him who my emergency contact was and what steps we should take if I disclosed or he noticed that I was in crisis. You can do this with athletes that you know have mental health challenges already, or you can do it with your whole team. But I think the most important thing, especially within team concepts, is to communicate those protocols and actions at the outset of a season so you don't create resentment between teammates, and it just is a supportive environment. I can't tell you how big of a difference that made during those last 2 years of university basketball for me. So we talked about having mental health assets. You can help cultivate athletes' mental health assets. So when we talk about resilience, we talk about balancing challenge with support. So sport is about challenging athletes to push their physical, mental, and emotional boundaries. And that's great. And you should do that as a coach. And it's a fun process. It's what makes sport really interesting and fun to participate in. But you have to also support your athletes. If it's all challenge and no support, we're not going to become resilient. So balancing challenge and support is key. And Katie is a great person to help you find that optimal balance. Also encourage self-awareness. We talked about developing a language. We talked about check-ins. Those are activities that will help your athletes build self-awareness so that they can actually describe and notice the emotions that they're feeling. And that in that way, you start to notice when you're heading down a slope towards negative mood or whatever your mental health challenge is sooner, and you can actually mitigate it and bring yourself back. Model positive self-talk. As coaches, our job is to point out mistakes often or things that aren't correct. So we often adopt like a negative language. To use a basketball term, it would say like, don't turn the ball over. That's a negative way to frame that. You could frame it positively by saying, take care of the ball. So I would challenge you next practice or training session. I know it's COVID, so I don't know if you're training, but to like reflect on how many times you phrase things negatively, and then try the next practice to frame them positively. You're saying the same thing and giving the same feedback, but you're doing it in a positive way. Because not only are you giving feedback, you're also building the inner monologue, the inner dialogue of your athletes. So their self-talk. You end up having coaches in your head when you're in competition and you're hearing their feedback. So essentially, when you're framing everything negatively, you're contributing to negative self-talk, which is not great for performance. And it's also not great for mental health. The last piece is using autonomy supportive behaviors. So things like letting athletes help make decisions. So something as simple as, okay, guys, we need to work on this skill. What drill should we do? So they have some autonomy in the decision-making process. Be transparent about why you're doing things. So Katie talked about just calling out when you're working on a specific skill. That's an autonomy supportive coaching behavior. And the more you do this, the more independence and freedom you're giving to your athletes to essentially become a smart athlete. We call like basketball IQ in basketball, but basically to not have to look at you as a coach in the middle of a competition to help them decide what to do when things go wrong. And it also incidentally supports their mental health. Last piece, perhaps the most important piece, and the thing I would want you to take away the most, is that you have to walk the talk as a coach when you're promoting mental health. And that means taking care of you. As a coach, you should engage in self-care because you will avoid burnout. We know coaches are at high risk for burnout, something to do with the multiple hats that I talked about at the beginning. So taking time to recover is essential for coaches. It's important to engage in self-care because research shows us that when coaches have more positive mental health, they create a more positive environment for their athletes. So it will trickle down to your training and competition environment. You can also model positive behaviors by self-caring. You are an important role model in your athlete's life, whether they express that to you or not. And so they are trying to emulate your behaviors in one way or another. You can help them by modeling positive behaviors like taking care of yourself. Really easy thing to do, and self-care is about, it's basically about taking time to do activities that you find nurturing. If you're introverted, that probably means activities you do alone. If you're extroverted, it might be things that you do with other people. Everybody's different. Their self-care needs are different. So you can consider how you're currently coping. So what mechanisms are you using when you get stressed? Are you drinking? Are you overeating? Are you getting in arguments with your family? Those are negative coping mechanisms. Are you exercising, doing yoga, making plans? Those are positive coping mechanisms. So be honest with yourself and consider where you are currently. And then reflect on what your self-care needs are. So what do you actually enjoy doing? What do you find regenerating? Maybe it's getting outside and going for a hike. It's reading a book. You know, there are so many different activities, and be careful of false self-care. Scrolling through Instagram is not self-care. There's lots of research about the negative impact of social media on our mental health. Mindlessly watching Netflix, not self-care. So it's things that, you know, you're shutting off, you're connecting with others, you're connecting with yourself. Those are self-care activities. The last piece to reflect on is whether you have a plan. I know it sounds silly because they're pretty simple activities, but I think a lot of us put ourselves last, so we don't make time to care for us. But the simple metaphor of putting your oxygen mask on before assisting others applies here. You can't give from an empty cup. So you have to make sure that your cup is full so that you can help others. You can be a good coach, a good spouse, a good father, mother, whatever it is. And you can plan to do that. Personally, when things are really busy, I schedule self-care into my calendar. I'm blocking off time so that I can maintain my mental health, because for me, as somebody who struggles with mental illness, the consequences of not taking care of myself are more severe than for other people. And I don't want to get there again. So I schedule it in. So you can take an active role in preserving your mental health, and it can have a trickle-down effect to your athletes. Okay, I think I've belabored that point enough, and I see I'm 7 minutes over. I'm really sorry. Here are my key takeaways. Mental health, illness, and performance are related but distinct, meaning you can thrive with mental illness, and you can also have poor mental health even without a mental illness. The minimum duty of care that you owe to your athletes is to provide a healthy environment. And if you can, learn to recognize distress and refer when necessary. You can integrate mental health into your coaching philosophy and practice, and in that way you can promote athletes' mental health and your own. There are simple strategies that we talked about today that you can integrate to promote the mental health of your athletes every practice. And last but certainly not least is that your own mental health matters in an incredible amount. And so if you do nothing else, take care of you so that you can be better for other people, I guess, and your athletes. And that's it. My email is right there. I will send you these slides. Please feel free to reach out at any time. And I really hope that you got something out of this hour and 8 minutes.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you very much. Great. So I think we are going to move on to our last presentation, and that is Victor and Katie. I don't know how the two of you have that sorted. So it's about XCSO's direction and what's coming up, as much as we can know that with being in a pandemic. So I will pass it on to you guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much, Krista. Thanks very much.
Yes, thanks, Krista.
Take care.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. I will pull up my presentation. So you guys should see this guy now.
Nope. Not seeing.
Just give it a second. Any luck so far?
No. Oh,
Yeah,
it's coming.
Okay, perfect.
You're good.
My old laptop. And I don't have COVID. Just smoky here today. Okay, so like Katja said, Katie and I are just going to go over some of the changes and also the direction that we're looking at going with our programming. Looking back maybe a little bit to 2018-19 and to where we are now and where we want to go heading into the future. For sure, COVID has complicated some of that process for us, but we're trying to do our best to adapt to that situation, as everyone is. So, okay, just a quick overview what we'll cover today, but pretty basic set of stuff. Hopefully, there's some interesting things here for everyone to take home and look forward to the racing season. So, and this is something we kind of put in place probably last year for the first time, I think, in a trans or like in a open way, was just like when we're doing any of these changes to our programming, what the intent is to try and do. So when we do criteria, when we design our racing calendar, the formats, all these things, we're trying to do the best we can to make sure that we follow these kind of rules in our this philosophy when we're designing those things. And this is pretty generic stuff. Like, I wouldn't say this is anything groundbreaking or super specific, but I think sometimes it's easy to forget those things as we get lost in designing criteria and documents and everything. So I think for me, making sure that the racing is enjoyable, that kids are getting out there to enjoy, working hard, and be challenged to improve, and do it all in a relatively cost-effective way. And in the end, it's to be proud of what they're doing, and whether that's for your club, Ontario, or Canada. So that's our kind of overall philosophy for the entire program. But I'm going to hand it over to Katie, who's our new performance coach, hired this year. I'll get into kind of how that came about a bit more as we move on, but more specifically on the programming side, I'll let Katie address that part. So.
Yeah, so as Victor said, these are the things that we like to keep in mind when we're either designing training camps or looking at what we want clubs to be able to do. And so I kind of wanted to share my coaching philosophy with all of you. This is something that I've over the years had to put a lot of work into, and I think it serves as a good base to figure out where I'm coming from when I'm making decisions or asking questions. So for me, my coaching philosophy is that I believe in creating an environment that fosters values of compassion, respect, and hard work. I aim to cultivate athlete motivation through a sense of inclusion, a culture of learning, and working passionately towards personal, and I would like to add in there, team excellence. So that's a little example of what a coaching philosophy looks like. In terms of team culture, I'm a really strong believer that positive team culture is going to be the foundation of future provincial success. This starts in clubs. Positive team culture within every club contributes to positive team culture for athletes that are on Ontario Junior Ski Team, Ontario Ski Team, Training Center, National Team. Up the ladder we go. More importantly, when athletes are involved in creating this culture, it becomes more meaningful and motivational. And so, for example, at our upcoming fall on snow camp, regardless of the version of this camp that we set forward, this is going to be a big component of it, is starting with the OJST and OST athletes, creating our team culture together. So I'm looking forward to that. And just thinking about success on the national stage. I mean, what I work with is the more high performance end of the sport. But yeah, when I was hired to take on this job, it's exciting because to me, being the dark horse can really inspire. And I really believe that it's time for us to kind of dream big again. Like, there is no reason why in the next couple of years we can't again be the top province. So I'm really looking forward to working on that.
All right, thanks, Katie. So just I'll run over some quick high performance updates kind of as a run up. Usually I've included this when we've done our coaching conference or AGM before. So just to kind of give us a background of kind of where we're at and where we're going and in that context. So at the national level, at the highest level in Canada, we have 2 athletes named to the national ski team. So that's Graham Ritchie from Georgian Nordic and Pierre Gall Johnson from Nakartak. They both train with NTDC Thunder Bay at the moment. And this year, we also had 2 athletes named to the national prospect team, something a bit new this year. But 2 of those 4 athletes named to that team were from Ontario with Anna Stewart and Luke Allen. So that was, that's great for us. And I mean, Catherine Stewart-Jones also renamed. She's a former training center athlete, not from Ontario, but did well while she was in Thunder Bay. And programming for NST for sure has been different this year. Quite obviously, everyone knows what's happening with COVID, but I think we'll probably see the first time that they might get together. We'll see what happens with COVID, but might be this coming November when they go to Frozen Thunder. But may also be some complications yet to come with that too. So, and Eric Broughton's been doing a good job of communicating with those athletes and the coaches as well. So, great. So you'll notice here that this is a nationals points standing, but no nationals from last year. Just kind of rough to kind of give you an idea where we started at now, coming out of 2018-19. Ontario's doing really well. Kind of come 2016, we did actually win the national title that year, but the para points are not included in this total here. So we did win nationals that year, but comparing apples to apples in this case, we were second. Quebec did not have very many para athletes at that event. So as you can see, after 2016, we had a quite sharp decline in our performance, going from first or second, however you want to look at it, to fourth that year. Yeah, and there's a number of reasons for that we've talked about in the past, but mainly I think one of the things that happened to us was we didn't have we had some provincial programming structure in place kind of after 2013 when we fell out of the OPSI program. We proceeded until about 2017-18 without much of a grassroots program. We had a high performance program, which was great, and we followed through till 2016, I think, fairly well with that group of athletes. And then you can see that the new generation, the incentives were different, and I think there might have been some influence of us just not being involved at a grassroots level as XCSO. So then come 2018, we've started to implement things, but I think for me, any changes we make take 3-4 years to see any results from. So when we did things in 2013, we saw that change in 2017. And when we do things in 2018-19, we'll see those in the 21-22 season perhaps. So at least we hope so. Just to break that down a little bit, you can see when the juveniles came in 2017, the level was not as high as we were used to. And then we've recovered a little bit in 2019 with that same group that would have been, by that point, junior boy girls. And actually, that same group this year actually were quite good. Some of those athletes would have been the Jasmine Lions, the Maxim Haffeys, the Guillaume Pelchas, now actually at quite a good level. So I think when they came into the higher end of our program, they did make a kind of catch up. But of course, we would like that to be a bit more competitive right from the beginning. So yeah, anyway, so that's enough about kind of what's happened in the past and kind of looking at last year a bit more closely. We can't do quite as much analysis as we did in past years, but I think we still have some good stuff that we can look at anecdotally. Pierre Grawl-Johnson, of course, and Graham Ritchie had really good results, both domestically and internationally. Julian Smith also quite strong from time to time, including U.S. nationals. We had athletes racing a World Cup. Looking back to 2018 as well, we had quite a strong crowd. Looking ahead to this season, there are some athletes qualified for FISU games. We had strong results there from Aiden and Alex last time. So looking for those guys to follow up on that. And then I think, like I mentioned, our younger crowd, including some of those athletes that would have been in that 2017 juvenile crowd, quite strong performances overall. Didn't get to show it at nationals, but based on Easterns and some other of those NORAM FIS races, I think there was some good performance there. So just kind of looking at stuff from our racing circuit, I did mention that FIS NORAM combo. So like what Easterns, well, not Easterns last year, but what usually happened at Candy Cane Easterns, what would have been this year as well, the MSA, where there was a NORAM combined with a provincial cup. Although we didn't have our Ontario race this year there, it was a Quebec Cup, and we've done that in the past numerous times. There does tend to be a tendency for those races to exclude some opportunities for U16. We've known that for a couple of years. We haven't been able to address it always very strongly. And that's kind of one of the reasons we've been looking at developing a district series, which I can talk about a bit later when we get to the calendar, to provide optimal opportunities for those U16 skiers. On the positive side, for me, Ontario Winter Games was, although it was quite wild with the weather, the event, I think, was really positive for that U16 crowd. And there were some technical challenges to overcome, but special thanks to Richard, Al, and Deborah as well to make that happen under the circumstances. So yeah. And then, so while those combined races, when we have a NORAM and an O-Cup combined, was really positive, I think, for the U8, or not always good for the U16s, it was quite positive for U18s. We saw some of those skiers, and when combined with university racers as well, we saw a lot of those U18 skiers step up and really push themselves to compete with the older skiers. And I think that kind of in that philosophy of allowing those skiers to try and go faster and push themselves further and challenge themselves works well. Not all the time, can't be every race, but I think from a broad perspective, I think it's good to have those opportunities in the season. And as we said, that crowd of 2002 skiers in particular, and the 2001s, which would have been that Juvie 2017, we had an increase this year of the number of skiers making the OST criteria, which was, again, positive. Yeah, and I think I just mentioned this. We also made a couple of changes last year with bib points to make it a bit more competitive and open it up to the U20 and open categories. That, I think, again, was something, looking at things, trying to make things competitive, was good. And almost all of the categories were quite competitive with the bib points. One category, I think, was the U20 men, actually was tied at the end of the season, but decider was split on how many wins one athlete had versus the other. So that was fun to watch. And I think kind of the feedback we've been hearing from athletes and coaches is that some of the athletes are really quite excited about getting to wear the leader bib, particularly if they have good attendance at races. They can obtain the bib for a period of time, even if they know they're not going to win, and vice versa. Those athletes that do end up getting in the top 3 do get a fan award at the end of the season. So that's been fun to watch. Less successful was probably the club competition. I talked to a few coaches. Not so many were aware that it existed. It was a tab on the leader bib spreadsheet, but I think it just wasn't advertised, and it was also relatively confusing to follow how those points were adding. But I think we're going to make a couple changes to it to next year to make sure that that's a bit simpler, easier to follow, and then we're going to add another category of club competition as well. And that document, the programming document with the criteria for all of the competitions for next season, is completed. It needs to be published. Hopefully in the next few days it'll go up on the website, so you can watch for that. And so just that last point on this slide here, there were some concerns raised to me throughout the season about distances and race formats. I think particularly, again, for U16 athletes, and I've mentioned that a couple times here, but that was one of the other concerns around, besides format, like no sprint or sprint, just the distances of some of the distance races when combined with U18 or whatever else. I think, again, district series is some way to address that and provide the best opportunities for those athletes to challenge themselves in an appropriate way. So, yeah. So, just as this is kind of a little bit of from 2018, 2019, and kind of how we're looking to make changes in over this kind of 4-year span, where we've kind of really started a distinct change from our previous programming. So the challenges, I think, in my mind that we've had, and this one may not go away, but a broad engagement in racing, the competitiveness of the racing that we are able to provide the athletes so that they can learn and push themselves to become better at the thing they want to do better. Our capacity as an organization, And now for sure this year, COVID-19 has been a large challenge as well. So we made our first steps in 2018, but I think really started going for it in 2019 and this coming year. So I'll go over this in the following slides, but we've kind of created these super camps, made it a larger provincial racing team. We've had some roller ski racing, addressing the racing schedule in terms of the length of the season, how early and how late, hiring Katie, and Liz, I don't think is on the call, but she's been actually a leader in the whole country for writing documents and being on top of, I think, what we'll get into later with the events coming up, how that process will work in terms of deciding whether event will go or not. And then I think this creating a bit of alignment between the province and the districts in terms of our district race series. There's been some good discussions with districts there. So in 2018, we started this process here. I don't have what it looked like before here in this slide, but this is kind of what we've been picturing our system as, and how athletes can fit in basically at any age into our system. And there's a home for them to participate. And there's a place for them to pursue their goals, whatever those may be. So just a broad explanation, but club programming is the foundation for everything we do. Without the clubs, well, we wouldn't exist, basically. And so we know that, regardless of what level we're looking at here, they provide, the meat of the whole system. So that's why it's blue all the way around the back. So something with the super camps that we also try to do in starting last year, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do them this year in the same way, but is to try and create an entry point for athletes to be pushed in the high performance direction. So those camps, although they're pretty grassroots, we do try and include, technique, nutrition, all those different aspects that are part of high performance in those camps, and they're a taster of what might come when joining the Ontario ski team, Ontario junior ski team, training center, or a college or university team. And we use the term high performance quite a bit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is only for the elite side of the sport. I think I use the term high performance in the sense of like that athletes want to pursue to get better at the sport. And whether you're finishing 30th at an O Cup or first at nationals, you can be trying to improve, and there's along the same aspects that everyone in the sport is trying to do. So, and of course there's the National Ski Team program above that, and we feed into that program and collaborate with them as best we can. Also got para in here. This is something that we as an organization are learning a little bit on the professional staff side of the things. Patty Kittler has been a long time champion of that side of our organization, but she has expressed an interest to slowly transition some of her work toward us, and we are looking forward to learning, I think, a lot that it's about the Paranordic side. So this is a basic overview, and we know that the structure is a little bit different than in able-bodied. We have athletes come in, such as Colin Cameron, who basically got recruited and was on the national team within like a year or less. And we have athletes that'll come in, and we'll work with them for an extended period of time, and they'll work on different goals. So it's a quite wide spectrum, and all of this fits into our how we will proceed. So yeah, we're looking forward to having this be more included in our organization. So one thing I get a lot of questions about is criteria. And I think one thing that when we changed our criteria to a CPL based system a couple of years ago, there's been a number of questions about how that works and how that like breaks down. And so if I can, I'm going to see if I can switch to a document. So I think stop this actually. And I will have to go back to this. So this one. So so I've created a simulation points list of skiers here. Skier 1 with 100 points, and so on and so forth, all the way down. And so this is for the Ontario Junior Ski Team, and I know there's some confusion around how that team gets picked and how that points list works and the average versus the max. So I will simulate this selection for this random list of skiers, and you can kind of maybe see a little bit better how that might work. So the first thing that we do is we create a list. We put all the males and the females together. We put, and they're in order, so they're not randomly, in order of their points. First based on average, and then based on max or their best sprint or distance. So you can imagine this is average or max. It'll be the same. So we'll create our first list. So we'll take that first female. So we'll take the top 3 2003 females. Sorry if this is going to be a bit tedious, but we'll try it out. So they go in here. Very exciting probably to watch this at home. It's, those who are starved for sports these days. So the next top 3 male skiers. So we'll go through the 2003 males here. And 2003 male all the way down here. There. So now we go to 2004 females. So you'll notice that there's a 2005 female above these 2004 female, above the first 2004 female. So that 2005 female will be picked in the next round, so the next 4. But so we'll take that 2004 here. 2004. There. So females done. So next would be the 2004 males, which is fairly straightforward in this case. So it's the next 2 here. There. And the last one. And so, okay, so now we've picked our age group athletes. So those are the top 3 2003 and 2004 male and female skiers. So this is the next part is where some of the confusion has also occurred. So now we don't look at the year of birth anymore. So now there's no difference. So now we're just going to go straight down the list for females and males. So that would mean that this 2005 female would be the first selected on the list. If she goes down here. And then the next female would be this 2004. And then another 2005. And another 2005. Didn't miss anybody. Perfect. Okay, so then same thing for the males. And we can see that there's a 2004, 2005, 2 2004s and 2 2005 male athletes who would get moved into that next 4. So we would do that with an average points list, and we would do that with a best of points list of sprinter distance. And so if an athlete would appear on either of those lists, they would be named the Ontario Junior Ski Team. So it's still not super clear, but we're trying to be as inclusive as we can with that criteria. We haven't set like a hard line. So if there's athletes in particular who are very strong at sprint or very strong at distance, they would still be included in the criteria on either best of or then also athletes who are quite even between the two sprinter distance. They would have a chance to be included in the team based on being either strong in one or the other or both. And that's why that is designed that way. And so we did try and include 2005s this coming year, or this past year. We do know that there are some special athletes sometimes who are a bit younger. There were some concerns raised to us about that. We unfortunately didn't get really a chance maybe to try including them in some way this season, but I think we're quite excited to have them involved. We know that sometimes those athletes, the maturity of those athletes can be different than their peers who are a year or 2 years older. But I think there are some, when we do have those special athletes come through, it's good to allow them to be selected as well, only through that next 4 method rather than through the top 3 method. So they have to really be better than their peers who are a year or 2 years older. So yeah, and if there's any questions about this, for sure, just either shoot me an email after, or I can address it in the chat here as well when we keep going through. So that is the Ontario Junior Ski team. I'm going to move over to the Ontario Ski team. It's quite a bit more straightforward. It's really quite simple. But I think if I'm not going to change windows, so I'll do this. And I'll go to the next window. I'll just do my whole screen. That might be. Can you guys see my screen? Or am I?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me do this. I'm going to just try it again. I'll just do it by window. Okay. So here's the nomination list from the past season. If you're unfamiliar with IPBs, it's a system so CPL is your point score that you get in each race. And there's kind of a expected trajectory for an athlete to reach the top 15 of the World Cup by a certain age. And there's a trajectory to follow to kind of be on track to do that by that age. And so we've used that a number of ways. And I think as you get older, that's a pretty common metric to be measured against. And so we decided, again, 2 years ago, to use that as our metric for our older ski team. Like we don't use IPB in the Ontario Junior Ski team. We know there's some variability. We use CPL, which is just the raw score, but we don't use the IPB, which is that score compared against a kind of international performance benchmark, which is IPB. So once they get past high school, that's when we start to do this. We start with a fairly, at the top right, you'll see there's a table here. We start with a fairly broad kind of capture. So 93% is generally, this will also use that standard for Quest for Gold, which is our funding partner through the Ontario government. But it's a fairly broad kind of intake for athletes. And we know there's still quite a bit of variability in that age group as they come out of high school. For example, Graham Ritchie, we weren't using this system at the time, but he would have not been high on this indicator coming out of high school. He might have probably just made it. Whether or not he would have been high up is another question. But as he progressed, of course, he's up near 100% of his IPB. So as they get older, that window or that kind of flexibility that we look for becomes smaller. Because this program, the Ontario Ski Team, as the athletes get older, we definitely look for them to progress and be on a kind of elite track as they move on. But we know there's some variability, so we leave that flexibility as they're a bit younger. So And so there's a threshold. If they meet the threshold, they're in, and otherwise there's other opportunities, and that's when I'll get to the district team. So the district team, I'll explain as I kind of pull it up here, but we knew that not all the athletes who, in the same vein we were talking about before of wanting to compete, wanting to improve, would meet the OST criteria as they move through the sport. So we wanted to create a bit of a catch-all for those athletes who still wanted to progress and still wanted to participate in camps and travel and be part of the sport in that way. So that's where our district teams and our super camps come into play in a normal year. So if we look at the district team, basically it's the top 10 athletes from each of the districts who would get nominated to the top 10 U23 athletes who get nominated to the district team. This is a bit different than, say, the SOD team, which is a U16 team. But you can see here there's a number of athletes, 10 girls and 10 boys from each district. And all of these athletes in a normal year would get discounts to the super camps. And we also run post-secondary specific training camps, again, to try and kind of support those athletes who are in the sport beyond high school, looking to improve, but maybe don't fit the criteria of the Ontario ski team, where the opportunities that are there are a bit more focused on competing at World Juniors or internationally. So so we're trying to catch everybody, but in not all in the same way. So you also noticed, this was new again 2 years ago, that it's been quite close. Last year was 8 points between LSSD and NCD, and this year NCD was 11 points ahead of SOD, which breaks down to like half a point per person difference. So I don't know how closely that's followed, but the discount's been well used by those attending camps, at least last year, and looking forward to having that group. Maybe come back when we can run more regular super camps. We did run one in Ottawa with post-secondary camp with that crowd after the Gatineau camp that we ran in the summer, and I only heard good things from Katie, so I'll assume that everything was great. I'll go back to my presentation here and try not to get too stuck in the criteria. Okay. Back to para for a moment, but Patty's done an amazing job. Colin, and he's Olympic World Championship medalist. That's been a huge boost for our program in the province, and Patty for finding Colin, and Colin for being a really great athlete and good person all around. So Patty's also been able to find a couple other athletes who are in the NST Prospects team now. That's been really good. And we have a group of younger skiers coming up through the program as well. And Patty's also had a number of excellent volunteers around her for the last, I think Liz said today, 12 years that Patty's been involved with the Para-Nordic program. And so it'll be a big task for us to take over some of those roles. So So just as a kind of rough guide to where Katie has come into our program, prior to her hiring, it was largely my responsibility to deliver programming in the province, and everything from super camps to Ontario ski team camps. It did mean that I was trying to be in two places at once sometimes, and so that's where Katie's role, again, I think we didn't expect COVID to happen. I think Katie's been stuck at home a little bit more than she's wanted this year, but once we get into a more normal calendar, Katie would be addressing OST, OJST, and para programming opportunities directly, allowing me to focus more on the grassroots side, super camps, and also working with clubs and Paranordic athletes a bit as well, more directly. That also has freed me up to take over some responsibilities from Liz and allow Liz to take on some newer projects for to hopefully grow the organization. And so that also means with us taking on some para that we can transition some of Patty's roles, at least in the near future, to us, as she looks to spend a little bit more time at home herself. So, yeah. So in terms of adapting to COVID, Katie, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I mean, as Vic said, it's been a weird year. I'm not going to go into that. What's been lost? Lots of away training camps for athletes. So, for example, Ottawa athletes not being able to meet up with Thunder Bay athletes, and not able to have the whole team together, which is in no doubt frustrating both to me and to the athletes, but it is what it is. However, we have gained a few things. So I like to say that on my good days when I'm not getting very frustrated by this whole thing, that challenge breeds creativity. It has forced my hand in terms of becoming a much more creative coach in terms of programming that I am able to offer. It has also freed us up to be able to do more club visits. So if we can't bring all the athletes together, we are individually, when safe, going and visiting clubs instead. And then also it has really allowed us to focus on some quality sport education with these athletes. Oftentimes these sport education sessions kind of get like a one-off like afternoon at a training camp, and there isn't as much focus on it. So I suppose that is a positive thing that has come out of all of this. How we've adapted, as I said before, kind of smaller club visits. So in July, I did a tour of Southern Ontario. Vic did a tour of Northern Ontario, and then just stopping off at those clubs along the way. We've been doing lots of online sessions with OJST and OST athletes and para athletes. More local camps. So most of you are aware, we did big, I call it the OG Super Camp, Quebec and Ontario combination. Crazy to organize, turned out really well. Everybody was super safe, but definitely COVID adds that extra organizational element. Also lots of communication, whether it's through Sportlog or Strava or emails with athletes. And I can honestly say that the athletes I've been working with, so that's the OJST and OST athletes, have been absolutely incredible in their communication. I had asked for, as we're wrapping up summer, debriefs from all of them and like asking specific questions. And right now I'm pretty sure I'm only missing like 3 people, which is really good for that many athletes. So I'm pumped about how keen the athletes are.
Thanks, Katie. And so something we've been working on since actually 2013 in a lot of ways is our alignment with NTDC and the national ski team. The NTDC has always been closely connected to the national ski team, but that hasn't always been the case for us as a provincial sport organization. And so I think we've had quite good success, I think, on the high performance side since we've started working together with NTDC more closely. And with some of the changes at Nordic Canada over the past years, we've become even more aligned as well in both our selection and nomination process, and even some of the delivery on the ground as well. So it's been a learning process for everybody, and we're excited to see where we can go still from here. And I think with Nordic Canada making changes and I think some good communication happening back and forth, I think we're headed the right direction with the whole high performance side. So, and one also thing that we've added kind of this year too is Katie, when possible, will also be able to fill in some coaching roles with NTDC at camps. COVID has limited, I think, that somewhat for sure. Well, for example, she would probably have gone to Frozen Thunder in November, but given the realities of Northern Ontario, Ottawa, and travel back and forth, and some of the other camps that Katie has coming up, that was not probably COVID friendly. So we decided to do otherwise. But when possible, that will be something that we look at. And I often fill, or not often, Timo would probably disagree, but when possible, I also help out in Thunder Bay, living there and helping out when needed. So, and then also our partnership with NTDC in the CSIO and Ontario High Performance Sport Initiative program, which is our sports science side on the elite side, has been really good. And I'll talk a little bit more to that as we go on. So, well, next slide. So that CSIO and that HP support program allows us to support or provide additional physiological, nutrition, mental and strength programming on top of what we can do given our resources. So CSIO has a number of practitioners in Toronto, but they will travel and come to the athletes when is scheduled. We've also have developed some kind of in-house practitioners, mainly through the NTDC IST. IST stands for Integrated Support Team, around the athletes there in Thunder Bay. So one person in particular, which I'll talk to just about in a second, is Paul Hemsworth, who's also doing a presentation tomorrow. He's been a really key practitioner for our high performance program, both doing presentations with XCSO and being the head strength trainer for the training center. And he's been involved for a number of years now. And I think his experience over the past, Timo could probably give me a better number, but he's been involved, I think, since around 2010. So he's been a really good supporter of the program. And now also being able to connect with the NSO and then branching out to our PSO with presentations and attending the conference last year in Ottawa. And so that program is not accessible for everyone in our program. OPSI, again, is quite high performance focused, and they're to be in the upper tier, which when things are individualized, athletes need to be within 2 points of their IPB, which if you understand IPBs, and if you don't, please talk to me. But that's quite high level, and so that's our Graham Ritchie's, Pierre Graal-Johnson's, and if we would go back to the list, that would also include the Guillaume Pelchas and the Max Holmans. So those athletes get a bit of extra support. Athletes in the Ontario Ski Team program and the Training Center program, they receive group support through CSIO, so not individualized but more generalized support as well. So lots of positives with that, and they also help us develop some of our staff PD, including wax techs, etc. So it's it's been really positive to be part of that program that we actually lost in 2013 and regained in I'm going to say it wrong, but by 2017 or 18. So so talking to Paul Hemsworth again, he did create a video series for us last year. And it's quite good. I don't think you can click on the link on my presentation right now, but if you just go to YouTube and search XC Ski Ontario, should come up, and you can probably click this link if you find my presentation on the XC Ski Ontario website over the next couple days. So getting to some stuff kind of moving forward, a little bit COVID related as well. As far as I know there's been some discussion recently, again, at the FIS level, all races in Canada will be fluoro-free this coming year. There will not be any testing to do that, like as in the past with LF, but we are fairly confident, given, I think, the relative success of the LF protocol, that this shouldn't be a problem, at least on the cheating side. I know there's going to be some confusion around what is NF versus LF versus MF, or what other combinations there are. And Quebec and Ontario have collaborated a little bit recently to provide some clarification on that. You can contact some of the distributors and the companies and talk to your local reps, although that may not always provide 100% clarity. Please contact myself or Katie or someone at XCSO if there are questions with products, for sure, and we can do our best to connect you if you don't know the answer. So just with regards to protocol, and some of the complication around what is NF and what is not NF. We will follow the Nordic Canada waxing protocol, which is basically an open NF policy. So any wax that is non-fluoro, that does not contain fluoro in any way, will be allowed. There will be no published list of waxes that will be allowed during those races, but again, that will be the coaches and the tech's responsibility to be self-informed around those waxes. When we're talking about tier 2 races, so for us on the Ontario Cup, that would be Sudbury only. We will actually have a little bit stricter policy, again, just to help simplify the protocol, and a little bit in the same fashion that we talked about in the LF policy, to allow coaches and parents and staff to focus on the athletes and the process of racing a bit better. We're going to strip that down to just no fluoro liquids, buffer waxes, and basic travel waxes. We will publish a list as soon as possible. We have the list. We just need to put it into a document that looks nice, and that should be published very soon. So I know there's probably some questions about that, and if you have any questions in the interim, please contact me, call me, email me if you have questions about how that might be. But basically anything that's liquid, the ULA buffers, and the basic travel waxes, so like CH6, etc., will be on that list if you're looking to buy stuff. So yeah. So calendar, if you haven't seen, this is on our website as well. That's the basics of it there. OUA Championships is there as well. There are some questions around whether the OUA Championships will run, given that the OUA sports were all canceled for the first semester. That has not happened for the second semester yet, but we will see what happens there. And OFSA also happening in February. So just in terms of the district races, we made a concerted effort this year to kind of also put those in our calendar as we were planning the season, mainly to allow athletes to attend those races in addition to attending the O-Cups. And we're really encouraging athletes to participate in those events this year, particularly given the chance of travel restrictions, etc., around the province, around the country. And so we're trying to work with each of the divisions to make sure that they're in a good place in the calendar and that there will be events happening. SOD and NCD for sure are the leaders in that regard. They've had series going for a long time, and we've used a lot of their experiences to help guide both the NOD and LSSD approach to that as well. So both division or both districts have had district series in the past, but it's a bit of a reboot in those two areas. So so there's another question kind of that's been coming a lot is, will we be racing, and how will racing happen, if it's happening or not? But we just posted today the event decision-making framework. So basically at 6, 4, and 2 weeks, there will be discussions between the LOC, the organizer or the local organizing committee, the PSO, NSO, depending on the event. 6 weeks out is a kind of FIS level decision. And actually, I'll skip over to this right here. So this is on our website. You can find it. It kind of outlines the process that that each of the race or LOCs will go through to decide whether a race goes ahead or not. And you can see 6, 4, 2, and 1. There's kind of important events happening in terms of decision making for yes or no. I think there's a good chance that we may see some cancellation or some kind of not downgrading, but changing from, say, FIS to provincial, or from provincial to a regional race, given restrictions or less restrictions. We will try to maintain CPL points where possible, but of course, the health of everybody will be number one. So, and the health units will probably also tell us that we can or cannot do things. So I know that's not a total clear answer on whether we'll have all our races, but I'm fairly confident we'll have something, and whether that's just regional racing or if it's just maybe there's no FIS races, maybe there's no provincial races, but I'm fairly certain we'll have regional races, and I'm fairly certain we'll have at least 1 or 2 provincial cups. That's me being optimistic, but I think it is possible. Yeah, and of course, as with everything these days, that those timelines are subject to adjustment as we go. Just a couple more notes, just general with programming. GMP refers to the gold medal profile. That's something that Nordic Canada has been working on for a while. It's something I think we'll be looking forward to seeing. It's going to have, I think, hopefully some interesting information for us when we deal with CSIO and sports science. We're excited to see it. And gold medal profile also refers to basically outlining the pillars of what it takes to be a high performance athlete. And so physiology would be one pillar, mental strength would be another pillar, etc. And I think they might have 5 or 6 areas that they've kind of identified criteria in, and will help us develop programs going ahead. Also, Kate Boyd hired as HPD. That's exciting for us, just working in that realm. It's good to have somebody back in that position, and number of changes at Nordic Canada too, which will probably guide our future with the High Performance Selection Committee and the High Performance Development Committee coming into place over the last month or so. And those will also be places that will be lots of discussion about how to move skiing forward in this country after the retirement of Alex and company. So yeah, I think that's it on my end. So if was there any questions? I can look at the chat box here.
Not seeing anything, Victor.
Okay. So that's it for me.
Okay, thanks to you, Victor and Katie, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll try and send you the presentations by email and get the permission to put them on our website. I had attempted to record this, and hopefully it did work, even though my internet conked out at some point and I was gone for about 2 or 3 minutes. So hopefully it kept recording. And I'm just gonna put JVD and the person that had phoned in on the spot. If you are interested in getting the information, also you'll be receiving PD points for attending today. If you wouldn't mind sending me an email at cd@xcsiontario.ca so that I know who you are, so I can give you the points and send you the information. That would be great. And we have the same time frame next Wednesday night, 7 again to 9:30, with another excellent lineup of presenters, and that is Melissa from the CSIO talking about recovery. She's a physiologist. I will go over some of the updates in the safe sport area, and then we have Paul Hemsford, and Victor was talking about him. He works as a strength expert at with the NTDC athletes. So it should be, and that's going to be an active session, so we're not just all stuck in front of the computer. So thanks again very much. If you have any questions in the meantime, please just send an email to any one of us, and we'll be happy to answer back. Okay, unless there are any questions, thank you and have a good rest of your evening. Bye.
Thanks, Katja.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.
Yeah, take care.